This is a short summary of week 2 of Patrick Lecture 30, Pride, Self-Will, and Fear. And this section focused on self-will versus free will versus God's will. Now, free will has its own standalone separate lecture, Patrick Lecture 18. The other two do not. They are spoken of so many times, but there's no one specific lecture. So the idea is to discern the difference between, for instance, self-will and free will. And, this is what by testing your feelings, your thoughts, by observing your daily activities, by sensing what's going on inside you is how you discern the difference. If you say, I don't know the difference ahead of time, to some degree, that's an act of self-will. Self-will is the one that says, if I don't understand it, maybe it doesn't exist. If it's not in my realm, if it's not in my understanding, if it's not something that I can verify, it is suspect. To do this work, you've got to explore what is suspect. You've got to go into unknown areas, and the definition of unknown is unknown. So, of course, you won't know ahead of time what you're going to find. You explore, you experiment, you play. So the self-will is the will of the little ego. Little meaning it has a boundary on its ability to perceive. If I can understand it, it exists. If I don't understand it, it does not. If it pleases me, it is good. If it does not please me, it is bad. The little ego is constantly chopping things into bits so it can make piles of good and piles of bad, desirable, undesirable. It's always looking for opposites so that it can avoid the so-called negativity and emphasize or get more of the positive without regard to what the long-term effects might be. That's why it's the little ego and not the big ego. So that it's all self-interest. It's all about what do I see from my perspective. Now, how can we get out of what do I see from my perspective? And one of the ways to do that is to get feedback, to listen to other people. They will point out your blind spot by saying, did you notice what you did here? And you go, no, I did that. That's feedback. It tells you what you are completely unaware of. Spiritual literature can do this by waking us up to ideas, and consider the fact that if we read them and we understand and have an aha moment, there's a part of us that knew that in the first place and is being reminded that there's a bigger reality. And there's pleasure in being reminded. And then the little ego wants to attack you for not having done the homework and the research and not have understood it the first time you saw it. Why did it take so long? Now that versus free will. Free will is our birthright. It's what makes us, when I was a kid, that's what makes us different from a sponge. Patrick taught me that sponges have consciousness. They're on the evolutionary ladder someplace, so I can't claim that anymore. However, it is obvious that things that move and act have more capacity to exercise free will than things that are stuck. And it brought to me what to me was fascinating, a deep understanding of the spiritual meaning of being born a rock. And either being in the center of the earth so that you never saw the light of day, or one day being eroded so that you were exposed to sunlight, or being of a certain quality so that people mined you and then carried you around and wore them. To be a part of another species' life without interacting, without exercising any capacity other than to be, is a fascinating spiritual life to lead. Now, you might say, but that lasts for the existence of the earth. Since there's no time, so what? And you don't know what that being is learning by being a silent witness to something. The choice is that consciousness, not mine. So free will is grounded in spiritual reality. That is, I have free will and I may need to train it, to learn it, to exercise it, to explore it. And in doing that, I'm going to get in trouble. But my free will also allows me to say that doesn't work, to say that's not a good direction to go in, to say that doesn't feel right. That is also free will. So free will is constantly active, but it is cloaked by self-will in interpretation and in the decision-making process, where the self-will, the infantile part of us, may often make decisions that the free will has to go along with because the self-will may control certain aspects of the human lifetime. So free will is interested in the long-term spiritual evolution of the universe. And it's also interested in the happiness of all. Now, there's a phrase in the lectures that says, nothing happens unless it's in the highest good of everyone. But that's a long-term idea. It may feel miserable for 16 lifetimes, or at least the next 10 years. And it is difficult to climb on board that. It is difficult to know what that means. But I use it as a way to remind myself that my mind does not know the plan. I do not know the needs of others specifically, and I'm not one to second guess what's happening. I do deal with what's happening. That's my job, but not to manipulate what's happening for everybody thinking that I know the outcome. Think of it like a little kid designing the planet. With its limited knowledge, it's going to leave a lot of things out because it doesn't understand them. So hopefully a wiser intelligence creates the planet. Another example of finding self-will versus free will is the marshmallow test. It's a famous child psychology test where you put a marshmallow in front of a child, and at a certain age, you can tell the child you can have this marshmallow now, or if you wait, you can have 2 marshmallows in 15 minutes. And then the person doing the experiment leaves the room, and the kid stares at the marshmallow. And there's documentaries, and it can be funny and heartbreaking that some kids really wrestle with the idea of waiting and give in and eat the marshmallow. And other kids just sit back and say, nope, I'll wait for the 2, it's okay. And then they're not monitoring the time. They're not concerned. They took the invitation for what it was worth and said, if I wait, I get 2 marshmallows. Yeah, 15 minutes, half an hour. I'll trust the system. It's an example of how we have different qualities of self-will, different capacities. And the trick spiritually is that we were born with those capacities because they need to play out in a certain way for us to learn what we're here to learn. And they can be changed, they can be adjusted. We can grow and we can learn. Now, one of the things that fascinated me, because this is the kind of reading I do, is recently the marshmallow test has been under attack. And I'm going to describe 2 confrontations, challenges to the marshmallow test. One is that the presumption is 2 is better than 1. And in some cultures, that's greedy. So if you're offered 1, you take 1. You don't hold out for more. It's a cultural thing. And if the person doing the experiment doesn't understand that, they'll chalk them up to no self-control. They have plenty of self-control. Their self-control is to take what's offered and not try to manipulate the system to get more. Another cultural bias they ran into is that some cultures don't have a tremendous concept of time. So 1 now, 2 later doesn't mean anything. Either you want the marshmallow or you don't. And then there's the culture that doesn't really like marshmallows and doesn't see the point of anything and doesn't wish to experiment. They're considered non-compliant. There's nothing non-compliant about a decision not to engage. We're just not used to seeing it in children, and especially children raised in Western environments. So another section of this is how you test your thoughts and feelings. the premise is that life gives you everything you need. So you read a lecture, you go out in the world, and there it is. The concepts are all over the place. Now you do have to recognize them, and that's the ability to connect the dots, to see something playing out. And the way that usually happens is it sticks in our brain so that we're more conscious of a concept. And so we will pick up when when there is a resonance in daily life. We'll notice that. If we're not particularly conscious of the concept, we may not notice it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, means we did not notice it. So to test your thoughts and feelings, you'll need to pay attention. And my experience is that once people do the work of testing and noticing, they begin to notice some distinctions in their will, some fluctuations and different qualities in the reaching. Self-will is always active. It's a dynamic. It has a forcing current. It wants, it doesn't want, it wants to stay still. It wants to move. Whereas free will has more of a flow. Then we have the shoot the messenger syndrome, where we derogate part of us because it's telling us things we don't want to hear. And so we wall it off, lock it off, disparage it, give another part of us, another sensory feedback mechanism, more priority. If you're suspicious of the mind, you listen to the emotions. If you're suspicious of the emotions, you listen to the mind, back and forth, which is all an act of self-will, making that decision. And then there are the blind spots. I've done blind spots many, many times. Please just Google it. It's a fascinating field of study because we're being asked to look at the very thing we may not want to see. And that's why external feedback, the comments of our beloveds, the comments of our friends and families, the comments of random people in the street, something that strikes us from what we read. It strikes us because it pierced that blind spot. It got behind it. It gave us a hint. So blind spots can be found, located, mapped, but you need to notice that there's the possibility that something exists and then explore that possibility. So there needs to be a willingness. Now, the free will is willing, but the self-will may block it. So the importance of this is we need to get a handle on self-will so that we can tell it, sweetie, sit down and be quiet. The grown-ups have to do something. We can not let it decide what we are seeing and hearing. So we have more options. Another section talked about how passivity very often masks self-will. So I'll just throw out two examples. One is that there's a conscious manipulation. I will be passive. I will not say anything because I don't want to, because whatever. That's not really passive. That may look passive on the surface, but there's a forcing, a holding under it, which you can determine energetically. It's what meant by passive aggressive. And then there's an unconscious holding on that is a fear of one's own power. The fear is so great we don't even want to mention it. We make our own power a blind spot. And then we just know when we're anywhere near that discovery and we stay even further away from it. In Jewish Talmudic law and in Catholic major, minor, and venial sins, there are degrees of sin and there are degrees of rules. And some of them are big, don't go there or else. And then others are small. And the way they're described in Hebrew is they're called a getter. And a getter is a small fence about knee high. It's just tall enough to warn you, don't go over there. So you have to consciously go over the little wall. You know you did it. Versus just wandering into the next field. So a getter is a rule that will keep you from breaking a bigger rule. Like a venial sin in Catholicism will prevent you from ever approaching a mortal sin. These are how we can internally set up barriers to ever going someplace. And the barriers can be so successful, we no longer recognize them as barriers, so that we label something dangerous and we know to stay away from danger to the point where we stop even thinking about looking in that direction. And the last section is finding God's will being an act of free will. Why would the self-will not want God's will? Because it's not theirs. Self-will sees things in dualistic ideas, my will or its will, your will, God's will. Instead of understanding that God's will is shorthand, perhaps unfortunate, shorthand for the way the world is. So I try to get past the prejudice about God, which we do have. We have resistance to the all-powerful authority. By changing the focus, instead of God's will, consider your relationship with gravity. Do kids argue with gravity? Yes, they do. They fall down. They learn to respect it. They learn to not ignore it. They learn to work with it. And sports and athleticism and tumbling and juggling, all these ways of being in the world are about using gravity. You use gravity to fling something up and gravity will bring it down. And you can plan, you can use it, you can work with gravity and achieve some really fascinating things. And that's the attitude I'm encouraging about God's will. God's will just is. It's how goodness is, it's how love is. That's just the way it is, like gravity. Accept it, don't accept it, test it if you wish, that's fine. You won't win. And to notice the effort in fighting it. And then consider, what are you fighting and why? Now, if you label it God's will, we get into the God image, Pathwork Lecture 52. We get into that territory. And that's why I find it easier to pick something innocuous that most people have given up arguing about, gravity. Or in your own body. If you want to argue about breathing, that's fine, but you won't live very long. And if you try to, the proverbial child argument is the child will say the equivalent of, I'll hold my breath till I turn blue. No, you'll hold your breath until you go unconscious, and then the body will take over. The natural laws of the body are like God's will. That's just the way it has to be to have life on the planet. God's will is the way the universe works. So self-will styles itself as being in charge, and it can thwart and it can turn things off and turn things on. And there's a level where it can. And then there's a level where it cannot. So a brief discussion of self-will, free will, and God's will from Patrick Lecture 30, Pride, Self-Will, and Fear. And thanks for listening. Love you to read the lecture because it's very cool. Take care.